When we think of the military draft, we picture young men, frightened, defiant, resigned, holding letters that could change their lives forever. But behind every name called, there was often a woman whose life would change too. The draft didn't pull women into foxholes, but it dragged them into waiting rooms, picket lines, and sleepless nights. Mothers who kissed their sons goodbye without knowing if they'd return. Wives who fought a different war, against fear, isolation, and a future rewritten. Sisters who grew up too fast, and daughters who asked why the world seemed so willing to send their brothers away. These are their stories, rarely told, often overlooked, but no less powerful. This is the untold stories of women in the draft.
When war breaks out, it is the soldiers who march, bleed, and often die on the battlefield. But what about the ones left behind? The mothers, the wives, the sisters. They never wore uniforms, never carried rifles, but they bore the weight of the war in silence. During the Vietnam War, more than 2.7 million American men served. Each one left behind a network of loved ones, women who waited by the phone, watched the nightly news with held breath, and read every letter like it might be the last.
He was my baby brother. I remember when the draft notice came. Mama just stood there, silent. We knew what it meant. We knew we might never see him again.
For some, the waiting turned into action. Thousands of women became outspoken critics of the war, not because they were unpatriotic, but because they had everything to lose. Mothers formed protest groups, wives wrote letters to Congress, sisters marched with photographs of missing brothers pinned to their chests. But most endured in silence. They cooked dinner for children too young to understand, balanced household bills on single incomes, and answered the question, "Where's Daddy?" without ever knowing for sure. For 58,000 families, the waiting ended in heartbreak. For countless others, the soldier came home, but the war never really ended. PTSD, addiction, and emotional scars tore families apart. And the women, those silent pillars, became caretakers once again, this time for broken men. He never talked about what happened over there, but the nightmares, they came every night. I just held him. I didn't know what else to do. They weren't given medals. No history book bears their names. But without them, there would have been no letters, no homes to return to, no healing. They are the unseen soldiers of the Vietnam War. In the story of war, don't forget those who stayed. They waited, they wept, they endured. They were the silent pillars who held up a nation at war. While many women endured the war from afar, tethered to it by love, loss, and letters, others stepped into the storm itself, not with rifles, but with bandages, not to take lives, but to save them. They were the nurses, medics, and caregivers of a war that never slowed down. American women, many of them barely in their 20s, volunteered to serve in evacuation hospitals, surgical units, and forward medical posts across South Vietnam. Some had medical training before arriving. Others learned with every torn limb, every shattered face, every soldier whispering for his mother in the final seconds of his life. Dear Mom, today we lost 5 more boys. One of them held my hand the whole time. I told him he'd be okay. He died before the morphine even kicked in. These women lived in a constant state of triage, emotionally and physically. They stitched skin, stabilized wounds, and sometimes simply sat beside the dying when no one else could. Some were decorated, some were forgotten, and many, even decades later, struggled to explain to anyone back home what they truly seen, what they truly carried. I came to Vietnam thinking I would help people. I left feeling like a ghost who had borrowed someone else's skin. They were healers in uniform, wounded in ways that didn't always bleed. Their battleground wasn't just rice paddies and fire bases, it was the fragile line between life and death, between hope and horror. While some women wore fatigues and others waited by the mailbox, A growing number picked up placards, megaphones, and the courage to speak against the tide. They weren't just bystanders. They were organizers, agitators, and moral compasses. In kitchens, college halls, church basements, and public squares, they questioned not only the war, but the soul of the nation. Many had brothers, husbands, or sons already drafted. Others had seen the human cost through letters, hospital visits, or folded flags. For them, protest wasn't rebellion. It was grief turned into action. Women like Cora Weiss, Diane Nash, and Barbara Deming challenged not just military policy, but the very idea of what patriotism could mean. For them, peace was not passivity, it was resistance. The women's peace movement wasn't a monolith. Black women organized against both war and racism, challenging how the draft disproportionately affected their communities. Chicana and Native women raised their voices for justice and sovereignty. LGBTQ+ women marched to be heard, not erased. Sometimes they were mocked, threatened, labeled as traitors, but still they marched. They testified before Congress. They formed human chains around draft offices. They risked arrest. They gave their voices so others might keep their lives. To my son in Da Nang, I fight here so you won't have to die there. Love, Mom. History often remembers the generals, the strategies, the battlefield maps, but it is incomplete without the women who made noise when silence would have been easier. They didn't wear medals, but they carried the weight of a nation's conscience. And their voices still echo, from courthouse steps to classroom chalkboards, reminding us that sometimes the most patriotic thing you can do is dissent.
They weren't always on the front lines, but they were always in the fight. From covert operatives and jungle medics to messengers and mine layers, Vietnamese women risked everything in the name of liberation. In our next episode, we reveal the untold stories of these hidden warriors, the fearless, the forgotten, and the unstoppable. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss this powerful